Hi, good morning. Jito, are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
Okay, nice to have you on the line today. So, first of all, I would like to make our audience understand who is Jito. Jito Kuyamba is a partner at Kugala Capital Plec, a leading private equity firm in Zambia. He spent his formative years in Montreal, Canada, where he studied business and political science at Concordia University. He then worked at a premium media conglomerate in Canada before returning to Zambia, where he worked as an executive at an advisory firm with a focus on mining and energy ventures. Jito also served as a board member of numerous successful small-sized enterprises in Zambia. So, Jito, you are one of the confirmed speaker for a huge event coming up in the US called the African Energy Investment Summit. So, you being one of the confirmed speaker to speak at the event, how excited are you for that event?
Well, I'm extremely excited, and it's always a great feeling to know that to be on a global sort of stage to share the story of Africa and its promise. And really, I think what I treasure most about such opportunities is to be, in the heart of where all the action is taking place in the world. Obviously, in a place such as Washington in the US, where you have a lot of investors convening who have very little understanding of Africa. I think we're still, even with all the technology and social media and all that, Africa is still pretty much in the dark in terms of people's understanding of its potential for return on investments and just being an ideal climate for investment. So to be someone who likes to call himself a proponent of Africa and its greatness and its promise, I think that's really what excites me most.
Awesome. That makes a lot of sense. And so, what specifically will you be talking about at the event?
Mostly on the regulatory side. I think one question a lot of investors ask when they come down to Africa or whenever they are for one reason or another compelled to come down and see what opportunities we have down here, they wonder, do we have the right legislative frameworks or legal frameworks in order for them to feel that the investment is secure? Because people, most of them are concerned about the impact of political force majeure on the investment, and that's one area where I feel that there has to be a greater degree of emphasis in that. There's a greater degree of respect towards agreements, not only with private entities but also with government, that there's actually frameworks in place that can guarantee and reassure investors that the investments are safe, that they'll not be unilaterally grabbed or things of that nature. Then there's also another component of where apart from the legal framework and so on, and that sense of reassurance, but that the fundamentals from an economic standpoint, from a commercial standpoint, are still very strong, and that there's enormous potential. That we all run at a deficit, and the deficit means that there's so much room for one to create that supply through the investment, and that the returns are there, that the capacity in the market to yield a strong return, because the industries are growing, the GDP rates are relatively high in comparison to the rest of the world, and that essentially means that you have a ready market for a power investment.
Wow. Yep. That is powerful. It shows that a lot of people are going to take a lot from that discussion that you will have at the event. So talking about the event, the 2016 African Energy Investment Summit, which will be held in Washington DC from the 10th to the 12th April in 2016, and it has a very good theme. The theme for the conference is Unleashing Africa's Potential Through Energy Sector Investment, with the aim of attracting and promoting investment in the sub-Sahara African energy sector. So I would like to know what are your views on sub-Sahara energy sector, especially the power and electric industry in Africa.
All right. Well, I'll start with Zambia, really, because it's a market where I'm from and where we have our practice. And it's basically its story is quite similar to the rest of the continent. The only difference is, so first of all, we have a lot of unexploited natural endowments, such as rivers which provide for an opportunity for runoff river hydro investments or waterfalls. You've got a lot of coal reserves, which is ideal for coal-fired power plants. You've got abundant sunlight, with a lot of land that's not utilized, which is also ideal for solar power generation, and a few other technologies which we're yet to even capture. And of course there's other more controversial ones, like of course nuclear and the like, that are obviously available, hydrothermal and the like, geothermal, sorry. Now, with that being the case, and all those resources and endowments not being exploited, we have enormous deficit. We have growing populations, growing economies, and as you may be aware that usually the rate at which an economy grows is equivalent to the rate at which the demand grows for power, and the deficit. And you find that there is not sufficient investment in the power sector, meaning that year by year there's a huge gap between what's demanded and what's being supplied. Like in Zambia, for example, our deficit stands at just a little over 1,000 megawatts, and also because of the fact that we have 99% of our power generation coming from hydro. And we've had some trouble with the rains, and there's climate change going on, so there's a need for that points out to the first opportunities, that there's a need to diversify power generation in sub-Saharan Africa, because you find most depend on hydro. Of course, we can look at various other ways, and then so the key really is the deficit, and having a ready market that's ready to acquire this power. And one perfect example, which is actually quite inspirational. A friend of mine set up a business, took a risk, and up in the northwestern province of Zambia, in the northwestern corner, where it's a very rural and underdeveloped area where even the power grid does not reach, they took a risk, acquired a site where there's a waterfall, set up a mini hydro plant that generates about just a little over 700 kilowatts of power. And what essentially happened is they created a little economic ecosystem around that. I mean, enterprises began to develop because all of a sudden there was power in an area where there weren't any. So innovation came about, manufacturing, and all sorts of jobs were created. And because of that, all the power that they generate is fully utilized. So that also points to the great potential that power generation brings to Africa. Not only is it something that is of economic value, a great return for commercial purposes to investors, but the impact to alleviate poverty and create jobs and really be a trigger for an economic revolution, essentially. And that's something that really excites me about Sub-Saharan Africa, and that's something I really want to highlight in great detail at the conference.
Wow. I really do agree with the points that you just cited. It makes a lot of sense. And another thing that I believe most people are really interested in knowing is, do you feel African government needs to do more to attract more investment and development in Africa? If so, what should African governments play?
In recent years, we've been lucky, and crisis always presents opportunity. And for the last, I would say, 20 years, because most most African countries have been independent for just over 50 years on average. And in terms of getting to a point where we look at infrastructure as a means to continue to develop ourselves, and power being part of that, has only started really being looked at seriously recently. And that's only because we have legacy infrastructure that was built before colonialism, and then in the post-colonial era, there wasn't much emphasis on developing power, and governments don't tend to not be the best in terms of developing permanent infrastructure of such nature. So the view to look to the private sector to develop such infrastructure only happened recently. So from the Zambian perspective, the Department of Energy developed a wing which is known as the Office for the Promotion of Private Power Investments, which essentially looks to look at IPPs, which is the independent power producers, and enable them to streamline the process towards getting the agreements done, the agreements with government, making sure that their environmental aspects are sorted out, the regulatory components, and then getting to a point where they can get a power purchase agreement either with the power utility or directly with an off-taker, who's not power utility, utilizing the infrastructure, the transmission infrastructure of the power utility, and also putting in fiscal incentives to essentially make the sector more exciting. And what's recently happening, or it has happened, but there's still a bit of a process, is that for political reasons, the price of power has been very cheap, particularly in Zambia. And a lot of investors haven't been very keen to invest in the power sector from a private perspective in generation. Because usually the ideal client is the power utility, because they have larger capacity to take up more power and distribute it further, because they already have clients to pass the power on. Now, with low tariffs means that an IPP will not be able to charge a cost-reflective or commercially viable tariff. But now that the governments, particularly in Zambia, have raised the tariffs to businesses and commercial entities, mines, and individuals, it means that the power utility now has the ability to purchase power from IPPs. So those are the types of policies that have been put in place to try and spur private power development, and there needs to be more of that. I think they mean well to put those in place, but there has to be a lot more efficiency in the manner in which that they're being put in place. And of course, we look through the assistance of I think USAID has assisted in formulating the renewable feed-in tariff policy, and a few other mechanisms through other aid agencies or international development finance institutions putting together financial products which enable easier agreements between IPPs and utilities in the countries.
Wow. I really do get that. And so let's talk about local participants right now in the African region. So how can the government do to encourage local participation in the energy sector across Africa?
Well, that's a great question, and that's a very important question. And I think that question really has bearing on everything else in the region, whether it be mining or agriculture and the like. Local participation is necessary, and it's important for there to be continued sustainable development of wealth for locals, because you find that a lot of foreign investors, of course it's great that you have foreign investors come in, make their investments, repatriate their profits, which is allowed in this particular region, but at the same time you don't have a greater degree of impact on the local in terms of skills and the like. So there has to be a view to enable either through equity. So for example, for a foreign investor to invest in an IPP, for them to take on a local partner from a sub-Saharan African country, I think with perhaps an incentive package with that would enable more local participation, because I think one thing investors like is fiscal incentives, and then also just a greater view to see which locals have access to concessions, whether it be coal concessions, because that's one way of participating in power generation. So if you have surface rights or large land, and the government provides linkages between a local who has large land with a solar investor to do a solar farm, or perhaps some of the coal concessions I mentioned, does that with a coal an entity that's looking to do a coal-fired power plant, or one who gets a water right, so that they could then partner with a foreign investor to do a runoff river or mini hydro site. So I think it's a combination of that's what comes off the top of my head in terms of what can enable local participation. But the sad reality really is, for the last 50 years of independence that most South African countries have had, the rate at which we've been able to develop ourselves to be able to participate in such sectors has been quite limited, and also because of deficiencies of capital, deficiencies of technology and knowledge and skills, still very much lacking. So we still have to go through a process of development in those regards before we can actually actively participate in these type of investments.
Wow. That is very powerful as well, and I believe most of the things that you said are very, very necessary for people to come and listen to all this powerful information. and you've talked about the view on energy sector in the Sub-Sahara. You talk about so what about you're gonna talk at the event. You talked about some of the things that you do in Zambia. So what do you think delegates should expect from the event?
I expect that they should be inspired. Their interest in the continent should be piqued. It should enable them to mobilize teams down to Africa to come and do fact finding. I mean, it's one thing to hear about it from a distance in a conference far away, but to come on the ground, I think they'll be pleasantly surprised. I expect that at that point, after establishing that it is indeed safe to do business in these regions, that they can indeed have establish good local partners. You have stable governments who actually make up for the majority, not necessarily the ones that have been unstable, which tends to make up most of what news stories. But I expect that once those sort of direct investigations are done as a result of this conference, I expect that within the next 3 to 5 years, a great degree of interest in the power sector, with actual transactions taking place, with partnerships being built, and power being generated as a result of that.
Wow, that is very true and makes a lot of sense. And we've really talked on a lot of brief things that people should expect from the event, and there are a lot of people who needs to be in this kind of event. There are a lot of business executive and investors who are going to also be at the event. And for those who are interested in coming to this event and have not had the chance to register, you can go to the event website, www.nkmevent.com/AEIS, or you can send an email to register@nkmevent.com. Jito, I really want to personally thank you so much for being on this interview, and I myself, I can't really wait to listen to some of the things you have to say about the event. I believe they are very powerful, and we all as Africans and investors and business executives with the interest in energy sector needs to be at that event. I really want to thank you for being on the interview, Jito.
Well, thank you so much. It was my pleasure, and I really look forward to it. So hopefully I'll see you. I mean, most definitely I'll see you in April next year.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Jito.
Fantastic.
All
Cheers.
Right. Bye.